Hey everyone, thank you for taking some time to review this PowerPoint with me today. I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to make it to Albuquerque for the meeting, so I decided to record the PowerPoint and put it on YouTube for anyone who might like to see it. I am the New Mexico Director for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. Um, as you can see on the screen, I just have a few slides talking about MUFON and what we do. And I've been holding monthly meetings in Alamogordo, New Mexico. I call the group Coffee Cups and Flying Saucers. And I've been having those meetings there since 2019. Now, we were shut down a little while for COVID, but we came right back. And, we're at the point now where the group's grown so large that we have to have our meetings over at the Otero Arts Building on the corner of 12th and Indiana Avenue. We have them on the third Saturday of the month at 11 a.m. So today, like I said, I just have a few slides regarding MUFON and what we do, and I'm going to get by them really quick because we all pretty much know what MUFON is. MUFON's been around since 1969, and we've been investigating reports of UFOs since 1969 at the request of the witness. We do this by contacting the witness, verifying the facts of the case, and then we make a final determination regarding the event that the witness reported. And MUFON's mission statement has remained the same throughout. We investigate, promote research, and educate the public regarding the UFO phenomenon. And I wanted to point out that when you file a report with MUFON, confidentiality is our #1 rule. We keep the witness's identity and location confidential. Now, they do give us permission sometimes to use the photographs or use the drawings that they submit for future use, but we do not do that unless we have the approval of the witness. So, there's a lot of investigative, well, they say they're investigative groups out there, but, they come and they go. Mostly they go, but, MUFON has been around quite a long time, and our integrity, our integrity keeps us going. So in 2024, New Mexico MUFON investigated 31 cases. 30 of them have been completed to date. The final disposition is the determination of what the MUFON field investigator makes after investigating a report. It's what the object or objects are. Of the 30 completed cases, 3 were what we call ERT cases, which are the experiencers or the UFO abductees. These cases are investigated by a branch of MUFON called the Experiencer Research Team, ERT. It's comprised mostly of medical professionals, social workers, and some are actual abductees themselves who have real personal experience. Experiencers frequently suffer from PTSD, and sometimes they just need an outlet to vent the turmoil that they endured through their experience. Speaking with someone who understands and has that experience themselves is often helpful to experiencers. So MUFON's recording system was knocked offline this year from February to April. You can see just by the graphic on the screen that comparing 2024 to 2023, there's a really big difference in cases. This has taught MUFON that we needed to adjust our security and make some changes. You may or may not have noticed, we have something out there. It's called the last 20 cases. You can go out there and look at them, but now there's a large watermark on them, so they can't be, you can download them, but you're not going to get that watermark image off of them. And also, anything that we post on our website We do so with the permission of the witness. We also remove what's called the EXIF or metadata that's in the background, so you can't look at that and figure it out yourself where the location was by looking at the photograph or drawing. Albuquerque was our #1 city with cases this year, and most years. Albuquerque had 7 cases this year. They have a total of 293 in our database from 2000 forward. There's a lot of really good, solid reports in the Albuquerque area. We get a lot of stuff from locally here in Alamogordo at Holloman and Wismer, but Los Alamos and Kirtland up in the Albuquerque area, they really, really have a lot of research. So, that's enough with MUFON business. I'm going to get on to our main presentation. This I'm very proud of. APRO, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, is our main presentation today. It's regarding the premier UFO research organization, APRO, which had started in Wisconsin in 1952. They then moved to Alamogordo, New Mexico in 1954. Sadly, APRO ended in Tucson, Arizona in 1988. But, they had more than 35 years of credibility, challenges, courage, excellence, and perseverance. Jim and Coral Lorenzen started APRO in June of 1952. Coral had an ongoing interest in flying saucers after seeing one as a child. That event never left her. Jim had been in the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was a radio operator. He had an interest in flying saucers, although he never viewed one himself, but, not for lack of trying. Coral was the driving force behind the APRO bulletins and the UFO research. She was the one who first realized that there was a need for an organization that finds a way for amateur researchers to investigate UFO sightings and then exchange that information among themselves. In 1952, Coral had been working as a freelance news writer for several newspapers in Wisconsin. They used her for the Woman's Day features and garbagey garden clubs, home decorating stuff. It really wasn't her thing. But it was the only opportunity in journalism for women at that time. In May, the Green Bay Press Gazette had sent Coral to a garden club for an interview, and they stood her up. Before driving home, she was pretty bummed out, but she walked over to a local coffee shop to get a cup of coffee. As she walked down the street, she was noticing the people were all looking up and pointing at something in the sky to the northeast. She looked up herself and saw an elliptical-shaped silvery object at a 60-degree elevation. People were stopping in their tracks to view the object, which became known as the Sturgeon Bay Flying Saucer. Here's a picture of it, or a rendition of it. This object in the skies over Sturgeon Bay appeared to be metallic with a bright red glow on the bottom. It was moving very slowly towards the northeast, and it was visible in the area for more than 50 minutes. Based on those calculations from observations made in Sturgeon Bay, the Lorenzens were able to estimate that object was 780 feet in diameter, and it was hovering at an altitude of 40 miles. Today we would call that a mothership. More convinced than ever the need for organized research, Coral Lorenzen launched the first edition of the APRO Bulletin in June of 1952. She had made many contacts over the years who had the same interest in this subject, and she had remained in contact with them. They became APRO's first 50 subscribers. Carl and Jim started their organization on a shoestring budget and changed UFO research forever. Coral typed these first 50 bulletins on a typewriter, a manual typewriter. I know a lot of you may not know what that is, but that was one that had a ribbon in it. But she typed those herself, stuffed them in envelopes, and mailed them out to her 50 friends. Jim supported and encouraged Coral's interest, especially since he had strong beliefs himself regarding the phenomenon. They both had a shared opinion, which is simply that the saucers do in fact exist and are deserving of further investigation. They set out to prove ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that proposes that some unidentified flying objects, UFOs, are best explained as being a physical spacecraft occupied by extraterrestrial intelligence or non-human aliens, or that non-occupied alien probes from other planets are visiting Earth. In July of that year, the next month, APRO got a boost in membership when flying objects were reported flying above Washington, D.C. That was July 12th to July 29th of 1952. Flying saucers were reported by hundreds of witnesses and visible on military and airport radars. According to the Washington Post, the UFOs hovered only 1,700 feet above the White House lawn. Newspapers and TV stations were reporting what they were calling the Washington Nationals daily, and interest in the subject of UFOs grew, and so did APRO's memberships. APRO started to grow so much that a local member who had a mimeograph machine started to make the copies of the bulletins for Coral, so she didn't have to type them all up. But she still folded, addressed, stuffed the envelopes, applied the postage, and brought them to the post office herself. She, though, had some poor physical conditions. And, she and Jim were both working full time and publishing the bulletin in their spare time. In the summer of 1954, bad news hit. Jim's parents were killed in a car accident in California. So Jim and Coral moved to California to care for his surviving brother and sister. APRO published a few bulletins in California, but Coral's health conditions continued to get worse. She had several back operations, and she had a very worsening breathing condition. And her condition was so poor that her personal physician recommended that they move to the Southwest to improve her health. So, as a family, they decided to make a change. After finding a contracting job on Holloman Air Force Base, Jim, Coral, and the two children moved to Alamogordo, New Mexico in September of 1954. He began working as a contractor for security forces. He was an electrical technician for the Electronics Maintenance Division of the Telecommunicating Corporation. Coral soon also found employment on the base, but as a DoD civilian employee, just like me, in the range scheduling office. They moved into this small apartment on New York Avenue in Alamogordo. It was very small. These pictures, you can see this was a little 4-unit apartment building, and it was very, very tiny, and it's still there today. These pictures were taken just a few weeks ago. Although they were very busy, they continued to publish the APRO Bulletin, which by now had grown to more than 300 subscribers. Yes, in 2 years, APRO grew from 50 to 300 subscribers. And so begins the Alamogordo years, 1954 to 1960. The APRO bulletins were published every other month, and were mailed to those 300 members of APRO. The bulletins were included in the $3 yearly membership fee. Many times there was not enough funds for the postage, and the Lorenzens paid for the stamps themselves. Due to the increased interest nationwide with flying saucers, there was a lot of competition by other magazines and bulletins at that time. The first Alamogordo Bulletin had this sales pitch on page 2. I was unable to get a copy of that first Alamogordo Bulletin, but I reviewed Mufon's Project Aquarius, which is on the Mufon website. They've scanned all old print material, and they happen to have a lot of those old APRO bulletins. And I found the Alamogordo one, the very first one, but it was extremely poor condition, and I just couldn't make a copy of it for you guys. I'm sorry. The lead story in the September 15th issue was Hot Metal Burns Road in California. That bulletin was 12 pages long. Many of the bulletins were multiple pages, so the Lorenzen had to invest in their own mimeograph copier. It sat in the living room in that little tiny apartment on New York Avenue. So as APRO continued to grow, the need for more space and more of Coral's time was also required. So in 1956, they moved from that little apartment to a 3-bedroom home on Van Court. They used a spare bedroom in the new house to run the organization. By the end of 1956, Coral was able to leave employment at Holloman to raise the children and run APRO full-time. Soon, the garage was converted into APRO's office. Luckily, Van Court was close to the Alamogordo Daily News. It was just 5 blocks away. So soon they were able to utilize the local newspaper to publish the bulletins. This lightened Coral's workload, and it enabled her to spend more time furthering the organization's presence in the civilian research community. Eventually, the Lorenzens were able to recruit several Alamogordo residents to be involved in various technical fields and to help with the office workload of this rapidly growing organization. They were all volunteers. All membership dues were needed to keep the bulletins printed in mails, but the dues have now risen to $3.50 a year. APRO began to attract the interest from experts in the Cloudcroft astrological community and on both military bases, Holloman and White Sands. They still didn't receive the acceptance or credibility that they wanted, so they set out to change that by attracting a scientific consultation staff to verify their findings and research. They were able to convince several colleagues that the UFO phenomenon was real and deserved further scientific investigation. They attracted scientists in the field of biology, medical, and social scientists to assist and consult with the bulletin. Some of them were named and some of them were not. Dr. Lincoln La Paz, Director of Meteorology at the University of New Mexico at Las Cruces, had a monthly meeting for the White Sands Astrological Society in Las Cruces. That meeting was regularly attended by the Lorenzens. Soon the families became social, and this led to a scientific collaboration. I found a quote in the APRO Bulletin from Dr. La Paz in the April 1955 issue. It was regarding a report of green fireballs in New Mexico. Dr. La Paz said they were not meteors. The objects were described as brilliant fireballs that were seen by airplane pilots, military observers, and laymen. APRO's credibility grew by the use of experts in the field of science for analysis regarding their data and reporting it back in an informative and intelligent manner. APRO respected the integrity of their readers and reported in an organized and logical manner. The scientific method of case investigation that Mufon uses today had its origins at APRO. The method of finding a hypothesis regarding an event, gathering evidence and facts to prove that hypothesis, right or wrong, and then to determine the final outcome or determination of that event, truly was started with APRO. In 1957, that was one hell of a year in UFO history, let me tell you. It started off with a bang at APRO. Coral posted this notice in the January 1957 bulletin. APRO was gaining the attention of some unnamed government agencies along their way. I researched this presentation in the Alamogordo Public Library using Alamogordo daily news articles that were on film. They call it microfiche. I found daily unidentified object reports from all over the country in the Alamo paper. The topic must have really had a lot of interest, and it must have sold a lot of newspapers because I found it in every copy that I looked at. Continuing in 1957, I also found in the Alamogordo Daily News, Coral had a lecture at the Alamogordo Women's Club, and she did that in a time when women were not taken seriously regarding anything scientific. She was supported by the Unitarian Fellowship Church of Alamogordo. Her lecture was titled Flying Saucers, Fact or Fiction. She broke that lecture down into 3 phases: flying saucers and religion, flying saucers and psychology, and flying saucers and censorship. I hold my monthly MUFON meetings in that same building. This is the old Alamogordo Women's Club. It's now called Otero Arts, and they have an area inside it called the Art Space. And that's where we hold our monthly meetings in Alamogordo. Coral packed that house in 1957 with her lecture. It was full of civilians and military scientists, in addition to Alamogordo locals. Intelligent and well thought out questions were asked at that lecture with no attempt to ridicule the subject. Coral hated the term flying saucer, and UFO was a term that was started and used by the Air Force, and she certainly wasn't going to use that one either. APRO often used the term UAO, unconventional aerial object, instead. This headline story in the July 1957 bulletin regarding an event at Holloman used that term. Coral called the base and spoke with the public information officer, Lieutenant Colonel John McCurdy. She asked him about the June 4th sighting on Holloman. It had been recently reported in the Alamogordo Daily News. He said there was no official information or official release. He also told her, Coral, that technical people should be the ones more concerned with such a matter. APRO had already confirmed the facts of this event with their base resources long before they called the base for confirmation. APRO's eyewitness confirmed that there was radar confirmation over Holloman that day, and that a CIA investigator visited Holloman. He went to the photo lab, took all the photos and all the films regarding that day and that object's maneuvers. In 1957, reports in the United States were a little sporadic and really nothing out of the ordinary until October. The Russians launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, into Earth's orbit on October 4th. And after Sputnik began its journey around the planet, reports started to flood in from all over the United States. I took this picture myself that you see of Sputnik. It's up at the Space Museum in Alamogordo. You know, Sputnik has a special place in my heart. Growing up as a child, my grandmother used to take us all out into the backyard at night, and she told us to look for flying saucers, and we'd see these little red lights, and she told us, "Oh, that's Sputnik." You know, Sputnik. But you know, that was in the 60s, and Sputnik had long fallen out of orbit. But you know, she took that opportunity also to teach us about astronomy and you know, stuff in the sky. Returning to 1957, Saturday, November 2nd, and into the early morning hours of Sunday, November 3rd, there were reports from Levelland, Texas, of an egg-shaped object touching down on the road, stalling cars and trucks in a 4-mile radius on and near Highway 385 North. It was viewed by dozens of individuals, including law enforcement. Here are just a few quotes I found from eyewitnesses when I was looking through that microfiche at the library. There was a quote I jotted down from one eyewitness that said, "A big ball of fire dropped on the highway in front of us. The color changed, blue, then to green, then the object rose up and disappeared." There were also a lot of reports in the paper from Amarillo, Texas, which is just north of Levelland. They also described several moving gaseous objects, blue-green in color. The Levelland, Texas sightings were first published in the 1957 November APRO Bulletin, just weeks after they happened. And they gained nationwide and worldwide attention. Also in that November APRO Bulletin were sightings from various locations in New Mexico. Sightings from November 3rd to November 5th. Also these reports that I'm going to tell you next, I wanted to share from our area. APRO had a flap in their backyard. It was a history-making time for reports regarding flying saucers in Texas and New Mexico. This report occurred at 3 a.m. Sunday, November 3rd, just an hour and a half after the Levelland, Texas sightings started. Remember, there was no internet in those days, so they didn't know what was going on in Texas when this was also going on in New Mexico. Army patrols on the White Sands Missile Range reported sightings above the Trinity A-bomb bunkers. This report was published in the Alamogordo Daily News, but I'm using the Army reports here that you see on the screen from a FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act regarding the events from November 3rd are available on a site called the Black Vault. It backs up all the data that are in the APRO bulletins and also in the Alamogordo Daily News. In the lower portion of the missile range, there was a second Army report. It was filled by a Captain Glenn Toy, and Captain Toy says at about 0230 to 0300 Sunday morning, this is November 3rd, I and PFC Wilbanks were patrolling the South Range area and noticed a very bright object high in the sky. We were proceeding to Southgate and the object kept coming down to the ground. The object was not blurry or fuzzy, it emitted no vapor or smoke, and we viewed it for 10 minutes from approximately 3 miles distance. He estimated it was 75 to 100 yards in diameter and it was shaped like an egg. So at the same time, they had a report in the north end of the range up by the Trinity bomb site, and then at the south end of the range by Route 70, just outside of Alamogordo on the way to Wismar. Also, on Sunday, November 3rd, a test pilot left Big Springs, Texas at 1:56 p.m. and landed at Holloman at 4:15 p.m. This map I made is just his flight pattern from where he leaves Big Springs, Texas until he lands in Alamogordo. I just wanted to show the direction that he was flying. Um, when he got back to base, he debriefed with base relations, telling them that he saw an unconventional aerial object while en route. While traveling at 500 miles per hour in an east to west direction, he saw a large glowing object pass over his aircraft. It was around Amarillo, Texas. He described it as going like a bat out of hell. This was overheard at the base by local news director Terry Clark from radio station KALG. Now, Mr. Clark also had a report that was called into his radio station from a local woman, Connie Carrillo. She said that she and a traveling companion witnessed an object while traveling from Ruidoso to Alamogordo around an area called Bent, New Mexico. Also, that same afternoon on November 3rd, they noticed a sphere-shaped object parked near the edge of the road. That's Route 70. It was a dark green color. And she said they were scared to death and just, drove past it as quick as they could. So, just to summarize, November 2nd and November 3rd. On November 2nd, an egg-shaped blue-green object was first viewed in Levelland, Texas by many people. An hour and a half later, an object of similar size, color, and shape was reported by the Army over the atomic bomb detonation site and the White Sands Proving Grounds. Now, on November 3rd, in the afternoon, a similar shaped and colored object was witnessed in the air by a pilot and by two civilians on the ground. I want everybody on my next screen to look at this is the front page of the Alamogordo Daily News on November 5th. This is what the newspaper looks like on microfiche. This is what I was reading at the Alamo Library. I was surprised at the numerous reports regarding UFOs. This page alone features the Stokes incident, the fireballs over Trinity A-bomb bunker, a possible UFO landing in Las Cruces, a radio tone that is buzzing and puzzling the military nationally, and Sputnik was going to be traveling over Otero County the next day, November 6th. This is the front page of the daily newspaper. This topic really must have sold a lot of newspapers, or they wouldn't have had it on the front of every page day after day. Now, these articles that were in this newspaper were not hysterical little green men reports. They were well written with witnesses, accounts, and facts of what they were reporting. It was very refreshing to read this. The picture you see here on the front is of Jim Stokes. His eyewitness report made headlines nationwide regarding his sighting on Highway 54 on the way to El Paso. Highway 54 at that time was just a little narrow 2-lane blacktop, which was, Alamogordo, and then there was a lot of desert, and then there were 2 little small towns, and then there was a lot of desert on its way to Texas. The evening of November 4th, Mr. James Stokes called the Lorenzens regarding his ordeal that day on Route 54. He was so excited he went over to their house on Van Court to tell them in person. He said that afternoon, while he was driving south on Highway 54, traveling to El Paso, his Mercury experienced radio failure. Then car sputter and the engine died. At that time, he noticed there were several other cars off to the side of the road and that people had gotten out of their vehicles and they were pointing in a northeast direction towards the Sacramento Mountains. He looked himself and saw a huge oval object. He jumped out of the car to look at it a little closer. He said it was heading south over the highway and it buzzed them, was his terminology. It was low enough that they all felt the heat of that object. It passed over them, going south, it turned around, and it came back again. And then it hovered, changed direction, and went in a northwest angle. And he said it left at a high rate of speed, at least Mach 1. He said that it was probably 1,500 to 3,000 feet above them. And when it left, it was heading like towards the Oregon Mountains, which is more towards Cruces. Stokes, while he was at the Lorenzen's house, he kept rubbing his wrists and while he spoke to them, and they noticed he was really red and he was itchy. Stokes' facts for this had come from a notebook that he had with him, and he was jotting all this stuff down while he was watching it happen that day. And in that notebook, it also had the names of two other people, Mr. Duncan from Las Cruces, who Stokes saw had a camera and was taking pictures of the object, and an Alan Baker, who worked at White Sands Proving Grounds. The Lorenzens knew Stokes because he also worked at the base. He was an electronics engineer in the High Altitude Research Branch. After speaking with the Lorenzens for more than an hour and a half, his skin became very, very red and blotchy, like sunburn, and they told him he needs to go to the medical center and get his skin looked at because they fear he may have radiation poisoning. The Alamogordo Daily News ran Stokes's report on the May 5th, the very next day, and then they ran an additional report on May 8th that was regarding other eyewitness reports of the same event. That eyewitness was a former newspaper employee. He and his parents had been on the side of the road that day, a little further down from Oregon Day, and they witnessed the same event, so they backed up everything that Stokes said. This was too much for Holloman to handle. They made this statement regarding unidentified flying objects, and I'll quote, "On November 7th, 6 airmen claimed they sighted an unidentified flying object and did not report this to proper base authorities. They did, however, give this information to the local press. We request that each member of the military and civilians employed at this center refrain from any public statement on political, diplomatic, legislation, or scientific matters, or any controversial subjects, such as UFOs, without first contacting the Base Center Information Services officer. This request is in accordance with AFR 190-6. Disciplinary action may be taken against the offender. This is signed by, Lieutenant Colonel Jim McCordy." This statement ended all local reporting of the blue-green gaseous objects that were being seen over New Mexico in our area, and it ended APRO's flap. This picture you see was not published by APRO. until May of 1958. It was taken, though, in October 16, 1957, before the Levelland, Texas events. It was taken by a local healthcare worker, Louise Fortune. She had left the Muscalero Reservation in Ruidoso. She traveled south on Highway 70 to the Three Rivers settlement. She saw this object when she was near the railroad overpass, and it's a little north of Tularosa. First noticed it because of the brilliant white color, and she said it really stood out in the sky, almost like it was glowing. You know, the sky was a very dark blue that day, and this white object, she said, stood out like very different from the clouds. She continued to drive and she was watching this object. What was moving? It was moving also. She stopped when the object stopped and she jumped out and she took a picture of it. She estimated that that object was between Route 54 and the San Andreas Mountains to the south. She said as she stood there, it was stopped for at least 15 minutes and then it took off to the northwest and it drove quickly. It flew quickly out of her sight. You know, I have several presentations regarding the Mufon sightings on or near Three Rivers petroglyph site, which is where she was heading to, and around that section of Wismar. I also found numerous reports made by APRO of orbs in that same area. And that's present day. I have a lot of MUFON reports in that area of a similar object. Miss Fortune originally gave her photo to a Portales newspaper. They published the photo and identified the object as a lenticular cloud. That really made her mad. She was mad. And she told a lot of people how mad she was. She said she knew that wasn't a cloud. And someone had told her about APRO. And so she looked into it. And eventually, you know, after contacting APRO, she gave them the original photo, the camera, and the negative. The photo had been taken with a Kodak Pony camera using 135 millimeter color film, and it was developed on a Kodachrome 35 millimeter slide. APRO sent all of it to Kodak headquarters in Rhode Island for analysis. Kodak verified the photo was authentic, and the object in question appeared solid and most likely was not a cloud. The black and white image that you see here on the May 1958 APRO Bulletin really doesn't do justice to that object. I'm going to, this is just I use this as an example of how APRO found the experts on a subject whenever they got a hold of something. This is what the object looked like on black and white. And, you know, like I said, it just really doesn't do the picture justice. These three reports that I'm going to talk about next were from 1958. They were from August 8th to the 12th. And these are my last three that I'm going to discuss in this PowerPoint. And they were all a series of sightings made in Alamogordo during the Perseid meteor showers. On August 8th, a staff sergeant from Holloman Missile Development Center reported that he observed a box-shaped formation traveling south to east around 10:10 p.m. He was downtown on the corner of First and what was called at that time Pennsylvania Avenue, but now we call it White Sands Boulevard or Route 54. He was anonymous because he was in fear of regulation AFR 190-6. The next evening, August 9th, radio station KALG received a call-in report of a cluster of lighted objects which were passing over town at about 10:30 p.m. that night. It ascended as it moved. Terry Clark immediately went to that location and questioned the 5 witnesses that were still standing there on that spot. Then the objects reappeared while he was interviewing them. It returned out of the southeast and it traveled to the southwest. And they all watched it, Terry Clark and the 5 original witnesses. Lastly, on August 12th, Mr. Thorne Haas, his wife, and his children, they were laying on blankets in their front yard and they were watching the Perseid meteor showers. They viewed an oval object above their home that was traveling north to south. They said it was so low, they saw the reflection of the street lights on the bottom of it. Mr. Haas said, I was so close that we heard it make a sound like rushing wind. And Mr. Haas also worked at Holloman Air Force Base. This is the last APRO Bulletin published in Alamogordo. It was May of 1960. Here is part of the front page. Page 2 had an important note in it. Effective June 30th, 1960. APRO's new address will be 4740 East Cooper, Tucson, Arizona. Mr. Lorenzen has accepted a position with the National Science Foundation at the Kitt Peak Observatory. I found this picture of the observatory. This is how it looks now. The article in the APRO Bulletin continued with the project's goal is the placement of a 50-inch reflector diffraction limited telescope in a 24-hour orbit. Correspondence from headquarters will come to a virtual halt until the new headquarters are established, and the Lorenzens hope members will understand this necessity to slow down. And so ends the Alamogordo years for APRO. Jim and Coral had reached their goal of convincing many that the UFO phenomenon was real and deserved further investigation. And they had established an organization that attracted the attention and respect of the scientific community. Coral often referred to Holloman as a discussion center of UFO activity. Soon they reestablished themselves and their organization in Tucson, spending more time on publishing and research. In 1968, Coral made a statement in an interview that is as pertinent today as it was then. When asked by the reporter why the Lorenzens continued to do what they do, she said, specifically, because we are concerned that our government has failed to warn the citizens of this country of the inherent danger of UFOs. Recently, if any of you have read Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent, you will see that this is also one of his reasons for resigning from his government position and to continue speaking out regarding the cover-up and the danger that he was also concerned with. APRO's time in Alamogordo certainly led to much bigger and better things. They had gained the respect of the scientific community. The organization was able to support itself financially, and it enabled the Lorenzens to devote their time and efforts to research and speaking engagement. At its peak in the 60s and the early 70s, APRO was one of the largest investigative UFO research organizations. But in the 80s, it all came to an end. In 1986, Jim Lorenzen died, and Coral followed 2 years later, leaving that organization unable to continue without the Lorenzens at their helm. In 1988, the board of directors voted to disband, ending APRO. The Lorenzens' integrity and honesty in reporting without ridicule gained respect and longevity with the public. They were active for more than 35 years. And I'm in awe of what Coral did as a woman in a virtually all-male field. When I started researching this presentation, I really didn't know much about APRO's history, and then thought they were just another UFO organization like CUFOS or NICAP, and those places are also long gone. My research on this project has made me aware of many New Mexico-related UFO events that I never had all this background on or really fully understood. I didn't realize how rich our state's history is and how deep Alamogordo's roots ran in UFO research and investigation. The credibility of APRO's research in the scientific community and their ability to leave no stone unturned when they latched on to a report has made me a much better UFO MUFON investigator. So, where's all their stuff? Well, the National UFO Historical Records Center is now located on Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School on Nicholas Drive in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. They had acquired the case files and archived records of APRO. These ones that they acquired had been in private hands and no one had seen them before. Executive Director Dave Marler said that the APRO collection consists of 13 filing cabinets and some 60 boxes. They have long-term plans to digitize all those files, and those records are available for the public to view. But this isn't all of their records. So I get a lot of photos from people posted on our Facebook page, and I get a lot of reports from people in the area, and I really truly appreciate that. I appreciate everyone who reports all their stuff to MUFON, and I really enjoy investigating it, and my investigators really enjoy working on it. I try to post statewide stuff and post New Mexico oriented events and whatnot in the area. If you have a chance to stop by our Facebook pages, either the New Mexico MUFON or the New Mexico MUFON group. The New Mexico MUFON group is more of like a local thing, and we post a lot of local, photos and events and things that happen in Alamogordo and also around the state. And I really appreciate anyone that goes to them. Like I said, I have these meetings on the third Saturday of the month at 11 a.m. and I bring coffee and I bring donuts, and we have about 20 to 40 people who show up every month, and it's really nice to have intelligent conversation with people. And, I'm proud to announce that we're going to continue our meetings there for another year. We're booked through 2025 at the same location, Otero Arts on 12th and Indiana at 11 a.m. on the third Saturday of the month. So I wanted to touch on one more thing before I let you guys go today. When I was researching the APRO project, I ran across this really interesting quote from Leonard Stringfield. And, Stringfield's my hero. And, UFO researchers, we just don't play nice with each other for some reason. I don't know why. It's like when we latch onto stuff, it's like we hold on to it. It's not like somebody's gonna hand us a Nobel Peace Prize, but the best we could do is I told you so, I guess. But here's this quote from Leonard Stringfield, and he also was a lot like the Lorenzens. He never gave up his stuff, and he took the names and locations to his grave also. But this is what he said in 1975 about APRO. APRO, or Coral and Jim Lorenzen of Arizona, are both good investigators, according to those who have been in contact with them. But what information they get, they guard closely. They guard it as closely as the military. They will release nothing to the center to be put on a computer, nor will they permit anyone to analyze their photos or trace evidence but they're chosen. When they die, they will probably have it in their will that all their files and records be buried with them. What a waste. And I find that interesting because Leonard Stringfield did the same thing. So I guess that's the pot calling the kettle black. But again, I want to thank you all for taking your time to view this PowerPoint. I hope it was interesting to some of you, and I appreciate all your interest in Mufon and Coffee Cups and Flying Saucer. Again, I'm Maria Tellier, the State Director for New Mexico Mufon. Thank you.